The Kryxian fleet hung in space like a swarm of metallic wasps, their sleek warships reflecting the pale light of Earth's moon. Commander Zeth stood on the bridge of the flagship, his forearms crossed behind his back, watching the blue-green planet below with satisfaction. After 3 years of pursuit across half the galaxy, they had finally cornered the humans. "Sir, our scanners show minimal military presence," his lieutenant reported, mandibles clicking with excitement. "The humans have retreated to their homeworld, just as predicted." Zeth's lipless mouth curved into what passed for a smile among his species. The humans had been nothing but trouble since first contact. While other species had submitted to the galactic hegemony's rule, these primitive mammals had refused. Worse, they had stolen Kryxian technology during a diplomatic mission and used it to upgrade their pathetic ships, becoming pirates and raiders throughout the outer systems. "Begin the bombardment," Zeth ordered. "Target their major cities first. We'll teach these upstarts what happens when they defy the hegemony." The first wave of plasma torpedoes streaked toward Earth's atmosphere, lighting up the darkness with brilliant orange trails. But, as they entered the upper atmosphere, something strange happened. The weapons began to veer off course, some exploding prematurely, others simply vanishing from their tracking systems. "What's happening?" Zeth demanded, his voice sharp with irritation. "Unknown, sir. It appears to be some kind of interference, but our scanners detect no defensive shields or countermeasures." Zeth frowned, studying the tactical display. The humans were known for their cunning, but this was beyond their technological capabilities. Or was it? "Send in the ground forces," he commanded. "If we can't bomb them from orbit, we'll take their cities the old-fashioned way." Thousands of drop pods launched from the bellies of the Kryxian ships, each one carrying a squad of the hegemony's finest soldiers. They descended through Earth's atmosphere like falling stars, their heat shields glowing white-hot. The pods were programmed to land in strategic locations around the globe: New York, London, Tokyo, Mumbai, and dozens of other major population centers. Lieutenant Kryx led one of the assault teams targeting New York City. As his pod crashed into Central Park, creating a small crater in the grass, he activated his combat suit and emerged with his plasma rifle at the ready. His squad of 12 warriors followed, their armor gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Spread out and secure the perimeter," Kryx ordered through his helmet comm. "Remember, these humans are crafty. Don't underestimate them." The park seemed eerily quiet. No civilians running in panic, no military forces rushing to meet them. Just trees, grass, and the distant sounds of the city. Kryx's unease grew as they advanced toward the park's edge. "Sir," one of his soldiers called out, "I'm detecting movement in the trees." Before Kryx could respond, the attack came. But it wasn't from human soldiers or their primitive projectile weapons. Dark shapes dropped from the trees, creatures that moved with impossible speed and grace. Kryx caught a glimpse of pale skin, 2 long limbs, and faces that were almost human but wrong in every way that mattered. His plasma rifle fired on full auto, the energy bolts searing through the air. One of the creatures took a direct hit to the chest and kept coming, its flesh regenerating before his eyes. Clawed hands tore through advanced Kryxian armor like tissue paper. Screams filled the comm channels as his squad was torn apart. Kryx tried to retreat, but something wrapped around his legs, a tentacle covered in writhing smaller tentacles. He looked down to see what appeared to be a mass of flesh and eyes emerging from a storm drain. His armor's strength enhancers whined as he tried to break free, but the thing's grip was impossibly strong. The last thing he saw was a mouth opening where no mouth should be, filled with row after row of crystalline teeth. Similar scenes played out across the planet. In London, Kryxian forces encountered beings that could phase through solid matter, appearing inside their armor to tear them apart from within. In Tokyo, soldiers reported fighting creatures made entirely of living shadow before their communications cut out. In Mumbai, the assault teams faced swarms of insect-like beings that consumed metal and flesh with equal hunger. Back on the flagship, Commander Zeth watched in growing horror as his force's life signs winked out one by one. Entire battalions, gone in minutes. The tactical display showed red zones spreading from every landing site. "What in the void's name is happening down there?" he roared. "Sir, we're receiving fragmented transmissions," the communications officer reported, his voice shaking. The ground forces are reporting monsters, sir. Creatures that shouldn't exist. Nonsense. There's no such thing as monsters. It must be some kind of human trick, holograms, or he was interrupted by an alarm. Something was approaching the fleet, rising from Earth's atmosphere at impossible speed. The tactical display showed hundreds, then thousands of contacts, moving in ways that defied physics. Shields up. All weapons online. Zeth commanded. But it was too late. The things that had been waiting on Earth, hidden for so long, had been awakened by the invasion. And they were hungry. A massive creature, part biological, part something else entirely, latched onto the hull of a destroyer. It was the size of a building, with skin that shifted between scales, fur, and exposed muscle. Acidic saliva ate through the ship's armor, and tentacles the thickness of tree trunks punched through decks, pulling screaming crew members into mouths that opened in impossible places. Smaller creatures swarmed through space as if it were water, some with wings that shouldn't work in vacuum, others that seemed to teleport between ships. They poured into the Craxian vessels through any opening they could find or create. On his own bridge, Zeth watched a section of the view screen distort. Reality seemed to bend, and, through the distortion stepped a figure that might have once been human. It wore the tattered remains of a military uniform, but its body was wrong, too tall, joints bending in too many directions, skin that shifted between flesh and something crystalline. Commander Zeth, it spoke, its voice harmonious and discordant at once. Welcome to Earth. What are you? Zeth whispered, his forearms trembling. We are Earth's children, the thing replied. For millennia, humanity has shared this world with us. They feed us, shelter us, and, in return, we sleep. But, you have awakened us with your violence. This is impossible. Our scanners showed no signs of your scanners see only what they are designed to see. You look for technology, for weapons, for things you understand. You never thought to look for the things that hide in the dark corners of human nightmares. Around the bridge, more distortions appeared. Creatures emerged, some beautiful in their terror, others so alien that looking at them hurt. The bridge crew screamed, fired their weapons, tried to run. It didn't matter. Humanity learned long ago that the universe is full of dangers, the creature continued, seemingly unaffected by the chaos. So they made a pact with us. We protect Earth, and they protect our secret. You thought you were chasing helpless refugees. In truth, they led you here, to us. Zeth's mind reeled. The technology they stole was bait. Humans are clever like that. They knew you would follow, knew your arrogance would blind you to the trap. And, now you're here, in our feeding ground. Through the view screen, Zeth could see his proud fleet being torn apart. Ships designed to conquer worlds were being shredded like paper. Escape pods launched desperately, only to be snatched up by flying horrors. The screams over the comm channels were a symphony of terror. Please, Zeth found himself begging. We'll leave. We'll never return. Just let us go. The creature tilted its head at an angle that hurt to perceive. But, you traveled so far for this meal. It would be rude of us not to accommodate you. As claws and tentacles and things that defied description closed in, Zeth's last coherent thought was a warning he would never be able to deliver. Earth was not humanity's last refuge. It was their guard dog's kennel. And, the guard dogs were hungry. 3 days before the Craxian fleet arrived, deep beneath Mount Shasta in California, General Saracen stood before a door that hadn't been opened in 70 years. The massive steel portal was covered in warning signs in a dozen languages, all conveying the same message: do not enter. Are you certain about this, General? Asked Dr. Marcus Webb, the lead scientist of Project Nightwatch. His hands trembled as he held the activation codes. Sarah's jaw tightened. The Craxians will be here in 72 hours. Our conventional forces can't stop them. You know what that means. Marcus nodded slowly. Behind this door and others like it around the world lay Earth's darkest secret. The things that humanity had learned to live with, to manage, to keep sleeping. The old ones, the forgotten ones, the things that went bump in the night, all real, all deadly, and all bound by ancient pacts. "Begin the awakening protocol," Sarah ordered. As Marcus input the codes, Sarah's mind drifted to how humanity had reached this point. First contact with the galactic hegemony 20 years ago had seemed like a dream come true. But the dream quickly soured when it became clear the hegemony viewed humanity as just another primitive species to be absorbed or eliminated. The theft of Craxian technology had been carefully planned. Not to upgrade their ships, that was just the cover story. The real purpose was to ensure the Craxians would pursue them all the way back to Earth. Because Earth had defenses that no alien scanner could detect. The door groaned open, revealing a vast chamber lit by phosphorescent growths on the walls. The air that escaped was cold and smelled of ages past, of deep earth and older things. In the center of the chamber was a pool of black water that reflected no light. Sarah stepped forward and knelt at the pool's edge. From her pocket, she withdrew a small knife and pricked her finger, letting 7 drops of blood fall into the water. By the Pact of Solomon, she spoke in a language that predated any human civilization. "I call upon the Guardians. The Earth is threatened. The sleepers must wake." The pool began to bubble. Something rose from its depths, a figure draped in shadows that moved independently of any light source. Where its face should have been was a void filled with stars that weren't visible from Earth. "Speaker of the Pact," it said in a voice like grinding stone, "long has it been since we were called." "The enemies come from beyond the sky," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "They seek to enslave humanity. And what of our price? We'll be paid, as always. The invaders are yours to consume. But humanity must remain unharmed. The thing that might have been smiling. The feast you offer is generous. We accept. The word will spread. The awakening begins." Across the world, similar rituals were being performed. In the catacombs beneath Paris, French military officials awakened things that had inspired gargoyles. In the abandoned Moscow metro tunnels, Russian commanders roused creatures that had given birth to legends of Baba Yaga. Deep in the Amazon, Brazilian special forces made contact with entities that had been worshipped and feared by civilizations lost to time. Each awakening was carefully controlled, each pact renewed. Humanity had learned through millennia of coexistence that these beings could not be commanded, only bargained with. And the bargain was always the same: protection in exchange for prey. Dr. Webb monitored the global awakening from his control center. Screens showed energy signatures spiking at locations marked only with codenames: Site 13, the Bone Chapel, the Spiral Tower, the Bleeding Stone. Each site housed different types of entities, categorized over centuries of careful study. "Class 3 entities are responding," one technician reported. "The Devourers are stirring in the Pacific trenches." "Class 5 awakening confirmed in Antarctica," another added. "The geometries are unfolding." Sarah joined Webb at the command center. "How many are waking?" "Thousands so far, with more every minute." "General, some of these haven't been active since the Black Death." "Are we sure we can control them?" "We don't need to control them," Sarah replied. "We just need to point them at the Craxians and get out of the way." On screens around the room, impossible things began to move. Cameras in major cities showed shadows growing teeth, statues turning their heads, and sewer grates breathing. In rural areas, forests became hungry and mountains grew eyes. The very air seemed to thicken with anticipation. "General, we're receiving reports from our deep space monitors," a communication officer called out. "The Craxian fleet has arrived at the edge of the solar system. They're beginning their approach." Sarah nodded. "Send the final signal. Let every human know to stay indoors, seal their thresholds with salt, and keep the old protections ready." The message went out through every channel, every emergency system. Across the globe, humans who had been secretly prepared for this day began their rituals. Salt lines were drawn, iron hung above doorways, and ancient symbols were painted on walls. Humanity battened down the hatches while their oldest neighbors prepared for war. In the depths of the ocean, things that had inspired tales of krakens and leviathans began to rise. Their forms defied biology, creatures of flesh and dream and nightmare combined. Some were large enough to dwarf whales, others were swarms of smaller beings that moved as one horrifying whole. The flying ones were perhaps the most disturbing. They emerged from caves and hidden rookeries, spreading wings that shouldn't be able to generate lift. Some looked almost like dragons or great birds until you saw them up close and realized their bodies were composed of screaming faces. Others were geometric impossibilities, shapes that hurt to perceive directly. In the cities, the urban predators stirred. These were the things that had adapted to human civilization, learning to hide in plain sight. The creatures in the walls, the things that lived in the gaps between moments, the predators that wore human faces until they were ready to feed. They had been humanity's secret roommates for centuries, kept in check by careful rules and feeding schedules. But now all rules were suspended. The hunt was on. Dr. Webb watched his monitors with growing unease as the entities began to exhibit behaviors never before recorded. General, they're coordinating. Different species that have never interacted are working together. Sarah leaned in to look at the screen. Indeed, creatures that should have been territorial rivals were moving in concert, forming patterns that suggested intelligence far beyond what the files indicated. My God, Webb whispered. They're not just individual predators. They're a defense system. Earth's immune system. And we just activated it, Sarah said quietly. In cities around the world, evacuation sirens wailed. Not to evacuate people from the cities, but to get them off the streets. Humanity had learned long ago that when the monsters came out to play, the safest place was behind locked doors with the proper protections. Families huddled together, speaking in hushed tones. Parents told children the old stories, the ones that were supposed to be fairy tales but weren't. Stay inside. Don't answer the door, no matter who seems to be knocking. Don't look directly at the shadows. And, whatever you do, don't invite anything in. The military forces of Earth took their positions, but not to fight the Craxians. Their job was to maintain the cordons, to ensure the separation between humanity and their awakened guardians. They wore special gear, armor inscribed with protective symbols, weapons loaded with cold iron bullets they hoped they wouldn't need to use. Lieutenant Jake Harrison stood watch on the roof of a New York skyscraper, his squad spread out around him. Through his binoculars, he could see Central Park transforming. The trees were moving without wind, their branches reaching toward the sky like grasping fingers. Something huge was stirring in the reservoir, sending ripples across water that had turned black as oil. Remember your training, he told his squad. We're not here to fight. We're here to observe and report. And, whatever you see, don't engage unless it threatens civilians. Private Kim, barely out of basic training, was visibly shaking. Sir, the briefing said these things have been here all along. How did we not know? Jake almost smiled. You ever wonder why every culture has monster stories? Why kids are afraid of the dark? Why we instinctively check under the bed and in the closet? We knew, Kim. Part of us always knew. We just agreed to forget. The sky above began to change. What looked like storm clouds were gathering, but they moved against the wind. Jake raised his binoculars and immediately wished he hadn't. The clouds weren't clouds. They were swarms, millions of flying things no bigger than a fist, moving together to form shapes in the sky. Shapes that spelled out messages in languages that predated human speech. Sir, his radio crackled, this is command. The Craxian fleet has entered Earth orbit. They're beginning their bombardment. Jake watched the first plasma torpedoes streak across the sky like falling stars. Then, he saw them veer off course, pulled by invisible forces into the waiting maws of things that had been hungry for so very long. Here we go, he muttered. In her command center, General Chan watched the global situation unfold. Every screen showed a different nightmare. The Craxian drop pods were falling right into the waiting arms of Earth's awakened guardians. She thought of all the times humanity had nearly revealed this secret, all the close calls with alien visitors who had been quietly disappeared before they could report back. But this time was different. This time, they wanted witnesses. Make sure our deep space transmitters are functioning, she ordered. I want every spacefaring civilization to see what happens when you attack Earth. Because the message wouldn't be about humanity's military might or technological advancement.
It would be about something far more primal. Earth wasn't just humanity's home.
It was a reservation. A nature preserve for the most dangerous predators the universe had ever produced.
And humanity weren't the owners.
They were the zookeepers. Ambassador Vri of the Galactic Hegemony Council watched the tactical display in horror from the safety of the neutral observation station orbiting Jupiter. As a member of a species that had achieved spaceflight 3,000 years ago, he had seen many battles, many conquests.
But nothing like this.
The Craxian fleet, pride of the hegemony's military forces, was being systematically destroyed by things that shouldn't exist. The pristine holographic display showed ship after ship going dark, their final transmissions filled with screams that no universal translator could properly process. "Play the last message from the Craxian flagship again," he ordered his aide, though he dreaded hearing it. The recording was fragmented, full of static and interference. Commander Zet's voice, usually so authoritative, was reduced to terrified gasps. "Not possible, they're inside the ship, the walls are breathing by the void, it has so many eyes." Then came sounds that made Vria's scales ripple with instinctive fear.
Wet tearing noises. Screams cut short.
And, underneath it all, something that might have been laughter if laughter could be hungry.
"Turn it off," Vri commanded.
His aide, a young plebeian whose feathers were standing on end, quickly complied.
"Ambassador, should we send a rescue fleet?" "To rescue whom?"
Vri gestured at the display.
"Every life sign in the Craxian fleet is gone.
5,000 ships, 3 million soldiers.
Gone in less than 6 hours."
Around him, representatives from other hegemony species watched their own displays, their various forms of shock evident.
The insectoid hive queens were clacking their mandibles in distress.
The crystalline architects were flickering through agitated color patterns. Even the normally emotionless voidwalkers seemed disturbed.
"We need to call an emergency session," declared Ambassador Kess of the Eltarian Republic. "This is unprecedented."
Earth was classified as a Class 2 primitive world.
"How could they didn't," Vri interrupted. "Look at the sensor data. Those aren't human weapons. They're not weapons at all. They're organisms. Entities.
Things that our scanners can barely recognize as existing." On Earth, the hunt continued with terrible efficiency. In the ruins of Times Square, a pack of creatures that looked like inside-out wolves pursued a group of Craxian survivors through the abandoned streets. The soldiers' plasma rifles were useless, the creatures simply reformed after being shot, their inverted muscles knitting back together with obscene speed.
Sergeant Zek led what remained of his platoon into a subway entrance, hoping the underground tunnels would provide cover.
It was a fatal mistake.
The subway wasn't empty.
It was home to things that had been feeding on lost souls and forgotten dreams for over a century. The darkness itself seemed to reach for them. Tendrils of solid shadow wrapped around his soldiers, pulling them into spaces that shouldn't exist between the wall tiles. Zek watched in terror as Private Gorth was dragged halfway into a crack no wider than a finger, his screams muffled as space folded wrong around him. Something whispered in the darkness, speaking in a language that bypassed the ears and etched itself directly onto the brain. "Welcome to the underground.
Please stand clear of the closing doors." Zek ran.
Behind him, he could hear the wet sounds of his platoon being processed by the tunnel's inhabitants. He burst back onto the street, gasping, only to find the pack of inverted wolves waiting. They sat in a perfect circle, their exposed organs pulsing in unison, creating a hypnotic pattern.
He raised his weapon, then lowered it. What was the point?
As the pack closed in, Zek transmitted one final message to any Craxian forces still alive: don't come to Earth.
The humans, they're not the apex predators here.
In the command center, General Chen monitored the global situation.
The entire invasion force was being systematically eliminated. Not just killed, consumed, absorbed, transformed.
Some Craxian soldiers were being turned into things that served the entities, their bodies twisted into new configurations that hurt to look at on the screens.
"Status report," she ordered.
"Northern Hemisphere is 87% clear," Dr. Webb reported. "The European entities are particularly efficient. The things in the old castles and graveyards knew exactly what to do."
"Southern Hemisphere?" The Australian entities are enthusiastic.
We've lost 3 monitoring stations because the operators looked directly at what was happening. The Antarctica situation is stable, the geometries are keeping the Craxians contained in non-Euclidean spaces.
Sarah nodded. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Humanity had spent centuries cataloging these entities, learning their habits, their preferences, their hunting patterns. This knowledge was now paying off.
General, a technician called out, we're detecting movement in orbit. Something is happening to the derelict Craxian ships. On the main screen, they watched as the destroyed vessels began to move. Not under their own power, but being pulled by massive tentacles that emerged from what looked like tears in space itself. The ships were being dragged toward Earth's atmosphere. The devourers want their meals delivered, Webb muttered.
They're bringing the bodies home.
In the Pacific Ocean, things were rising from the deepest trenches. Creatures that dwarfed whales, with bodies that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. They reached up with appendages that could have been tentacles or tongues or something else entirely, plucking falling spacecraft from the sky like fruit from a tree. One massive entity, designated Leviathan Prime in the Project Nightwatch files, surfaced near what had been the Craxian landing zone in the Marshall Islands.
It was impossibly huge, satellite imagery couldn't capture its full form.
Parts of it seemed to phase in and out of reality, as if it was too large for the physical world to contain. The remaining Craxian forces in the area, maybe 300 soldiers, opened fire with everything they had.
Plasma bolts, antimatter grenades, even a tactical nuclear device.
The weapons detonated against the creature's hide, if it could be called hide, with no effect.
The entity didn't even seem to notice. Then, it sang.
The sound was detected by sensors around the world. It wasn't heard so much as felt, a vibration that resonated in bones and souls alike.
The Craxian soldiers stopped firing.
They stopped moving. They stood perfectly still as smaller entities, things that might have been the creature's children or parasites or thoughts made flesh, swarmed over them. The soldiers weren't killed.
That would have been merciful.
Instead, they were transformed, their bodies becoming part of something larger, their minds absorbed into a collective consciousness older than Earth's oceans.
Back at the observation station, Ambassador Vri was receiving reports from across the hegemony. Panic was spreading.
Several species were calling for a full military response, a complete sterilization of Earth. Others argued for immediate withdrawal from the entire solar system.
You don't understand, Vri told the assembled ambassadors. Look at the data. These entities aren't just on Earth.
The sensor ghosts we've been dismissing for years in this system, they match the signatures of these creatures.
They've been here all along, throughout the solar system. Watching. Waiting.
That's impossible, Ambassador Kess protested. Our surveys looked for technology, for civilization markers, for things we understand, Vri interrupted. We never looked for predators that exist partially outside normal spacetime. We never looked for things that feed on fear and flesh with equal appetite. A new voice joined the discussion, transmitted from an unknown source. No, you didn't. The assembled ambassadors turned to see a human face on the main display. It was General Chen, broadcasting from Earth.
How did you, Kess began? Access your systems? We've been monitoring your communications since you arrived in our solar system. Did you really think a species that could keep these entities secret for millennia couldn't handle your encryption? This is General Sarah Chen of Earth's Strategic Command. I'm here to deliver a message to the galactic hegemony. Earth is not a member of your organization.
Earth will never be a member of your organization. Any further attempts at invasion or coercion will be met with the same response.
You can't threaten us, one of the Hive Queens clicked. What you've unleashed, you can't control them forever. They'll turn on you. Sarah smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Who says we control them? We coexist.
We have agreements dating back thousands of years. We feed them, and they protect us.
It's a symbiotic relationship. Feed them what?
Vri asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer.
Usually? Livestock. Volunteers. The condemned. But, occasionally, when someone is foolish enough to invade our world." She let the sentence hang. On the tactical display, the last Craxian life signs winked out. 3 million soldiers, gone. The most powerful invasion fleet in hegemony history, reduced to scrap metal and biomass. "Consider this a warning," Sarah continued. "Humanity knows the universe is full of dangers. We've made our accommodations. We suggest you make yours. Stay away from Earth. Stay away from our solar system. And spread the word this planet is under protection. And if we don't?" Ambassador Kess challenged.
The image on the screen changed. It showed the creatures returning to their hiding places. The urban entities sliding back into the shadows between buildings. The ocean dwellers sinking back into their trenches. The flying horrors returning to their mountain roosts. All across Earth, the monsters were going back to sleep. "Then, we wake them up again," Sarah said simply. "And, this time, we might not be able to convince them to stop at Earth's orbit." The transmission ended, leaving the ambassadors in stunned silence. Finally, Vree spoke. "I move that Earth be designated a Class 10 restricted world. No contact, no approach, no surveillance within 5 light-years." "Seconded," Kess said quickly, her earlier bravado gone. The vote was unanimous. On Earth, as the sun set over the Pacific, the last of the entities returned to their ancient resting places. The salt lines were swept away, the iron charms taken down, and, slowly, cautiously, humans emerged from their shelters. In New York, Lieutenant Harrison and his squad watched the sunrise from their rooftop position. The city looked almost normal if you didn't know where to look. If you didn't notice the new shadows that hadn't been there before, or the way certain buildings now had too many corners. "Is it over?" Private Kim asked. "For now," Harrison replied. "They'll sleep until we need them again." "And, if they don't? If they decide they're still hungry?" Harrison was quiet for a moment. "Then, we remind them of the pact. We've been doing this dance for thousands of years, Kim. We know the steps." In her command center, General Chen stood down from high alert. The monitors showed green across the board. The entities were dormant, the Craxian threat eliminated, and the message delivered to the galaxy: Earth was off limits. "Well done, everyone," she announced. "Begin standard post-awakening protocols. Make sure all sites are properly sealed and monitored." Dr. Webb approached her quietly. "General, the entities took more than we expected. The transformation rate among the Craxians was nearly 40%. That means there are thousands of new things out there now," Sarah finished. "Things that used to be Craxian but aren't anymore." "Yes, I know. We'll adapt. We always do." She looked at the world map, dotted with markers indicating entity sites. So many secrets, so many dangers, all hidden in plain sight. Humanity had evolved alongside these nightmares, learning to live with monsters under the bed and things that go bump in the night. It wasn't ideal. But it was home. And now the galaxy knew when you came to Earth, you weren't just facing humans. You were facing every nightmare humanity had ever learned to live with. 6 months after the failed Craxian invasion, Ambassador Vree stood in the Hegemony Council's Grand Chamber, presenting his final report on what was now known as the Earth Incident. The massive hall, which could hold representatives from over 1,000 civilized worlds, was filled to capacity. Everyone wanted to hear the truth about Earth. "Esteemed colleagues," Vree began, his voice carrying through the chamber's perfect acoustics, "I present to you the complete analysis of Earth's defensive capabilities and recommendations for future policy." The holographic display behind him lit up, showing Earth in all its blue-green beauty. To most in the chamber, it looked deceptively peaceful. First, let me dispel any remaining doubts. What defeated the Craxian fleet was not human technology. Our best scientists have confirmed that the entities we encountered exist partially outside our normal understanding of physics. They are not weapons in any sense we understand. They are Earth's indigenous predator species. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Many still found it hard to believe. "Our xenobiologists have a theory," Vree continued.
Every world that develops life faces predation pressures. Most planets evolve predators that follow understandable biological rules. Earth, for reasons we don't comprehend, evolved predators that break those rules. Creatures that exist partially in dimensions we can barely detect. Beings that feed on fear as much as flesh. Entities that defy our understanding of what life can be. The display shifted, showing grainy footage recovered from Craxian armor cameras. The assembly watched in horrified silence as soldiers were consumed by shadows, torn apart by geometry, and transformed into things that shouldn't exist. The humans didn't conquer these entities, Vri emphasized. They learned to coexist with them. Through millennia of trial and error, they developed protocols, pacts, and agreements. They became the custodians of the most dangerous nature preserve in the known galaxy. Back on Earth, life had largely returned to normal. In a coffee shop in Seattle, two friends met for their weekly chat. Maria, who worked for a tech company, sipped her latte while her friend James, who worked for a department he could never quite specify, stirred his black coffee. So, Maria said, is it true what they're saying? That we're basically off limits to the rest of the galaxy now? James glanced around, then nodded. Pretty much. The Hegemony Council voted last week. Earth is now classified as a restricted world. No contact without human invitation. That seems lonely. Maybe. But, considering the alternative was being absorbed into their empire as a servant species, I'll take lonely. Maria lowered her voice. And the other things? They're really back to sleep? Most of them, James confirmed. Though there have been some changes. The Craxians that got transformed, they're part of the ecosystem now. We're having to update a lot of our containment protocols. He didn't mention the new department that had been formed to monitor these hybrid entities. Or the fact that some of them seem to retain memories of their former lives, broadcasting distress signals in Craxian military codes from places that didn't quite exist in normal space. In Geneva, the United Nations held a special closed session. Representatives from every nation sat in nervous anticipation as General Chan presented the new global defense protocols. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, we've entered a new era. For the first time in human history, we've revealed our true defense system to outsiders. This changes everything. She clicked to the next slide, showing a star map. The galactic hegemony consists of over 1,000 spacefaring species. They now know what we're capable of. Some will respect the warning. Others might see it as a challenge. The French representative raised his hand. What about trade? Diplomatic relations? Surely we don't want to be completely isolated. That's being negotiated, Chen replied. We're establishing protocols for limited contact. Designated safe zones where off-worlders can visit without triggering our neighbors. But, it will be strictly controlled. And, if someone violates these protocols, asked the Japanese delegate. Chen's expression was grim. Then, we remind them why Earth has never been successfully invaded in its entire history. On the observation station near Jupiter, Ambassador Vri was hosting a very unusual meeting. 3 humans had arrived in a small, unarmed shuttle, the first official diplomatic contact since the invasion. The lead human introduced herself as Dr. Elizabeth Sterling, head of Earth's newly formed Extraterrestrial Relations Department. She was accompanied by 2 others who were introduced simply as observers, though Vri noticed they never blinked and their shadows didn't quite match their movements. Ambassador, Dr. Sterling began, we're here to discuss the terms of Earth's interaction with the galactic hegemony. I'm listening, Vri said carefully. The presence of the observers made his scales itch with an instinctive fear response. First, we want to make something clear. Humanity is interested in joining the galactic community. We want to trade, to learn, to share knowledge. But, it will be on our terms. She produced a holographic document. These are our proposed protocols. Designated landing sites for approved visitors. Strict quarantine procedures. And, absolutely no weapons or military vessels within Earth's orbit. Vri reviewed the terms. They were surprisingly reasonable. And, in return? In return, we share our knowledge of certain fields: medicine, art, philosophy. And we offer something unique, a guarantee of safety. Safety from what? Dr. Sterling smiled. From us. As long as these protocols are followed, we guarantee that no entity from Earth will pursue visitors beyond our solar system. The implications hit Vri like a shock wave. You mean they could? Oh yes. Distances, relative to some of them. But they honor the old agreements.
As long as no one threatens Earth, they stay home.
One of the observers leaned forward, and Vri fought the urge to flee as reality seemed to bend slightly around it. When it spoke, its voice was like an echo of an echo: we are bound by the pact. But pacts can be renegotiated. The message was clear.
Play by the rules, and Earth's monsters would remain Earth's problem. Break the rules, and they might become everyone's problem. Back on Earth, in a facility deep beneath the Antarctic ice, Dr. Webb stood before one of the most disturbing discoveries of the post-invasion period. The chamber was filled with cocoons, thousands of them, each containing what had once been a Craxian soldier. They're changing, his assistant reported, studying the bioscans. The transformation isn't complete. It's like they're being optimized. Webb approached one of the cocoons. Through the translucent surface, he could see the figure inside. It still had the basic Craxian body structure, but overlaid with something else. Too many joints. Skin that shifted between scales and something that might have been eyes. Or mouths. Optimized for what? Webb asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. For hunting in space, the assistant said quietly. Whatever did this is preparing them for something. Webb made a note to increase monitoring. The entities had kept their side of the bargain, protecting Earth from invasion. But they were also learning, adapting, evolving. The Craxian invasion had given them a taste of prey from beyond Earth. He wondered if humanity had truly won, or if they had simply fed the tiger that lived in their backyard. In the depths of the Pacific, something ancient stirred in its sleep. It had fed well during the invasion, gorging on alien flesh and foreign thoughts. In its dreams, it saw the stars. So many stars. So many worlds. So much prey. But the pact held. The agreement made in the dawn times still bound it. As long as the humans kept their end of the bargain, it would sleep. It would wait. It would dream of the feast that might one day come. The Galactic Hegemony Council reconvened for Vria's final recommendations. The chamber was silent as he delivered his conclusions. Earth must be left alone, he stated firmly. But not abandoned. We must establish formal diplomatic relations, carefully control trade, and, most importantly, we must ensure that no one else makes the Craxians' mistake. You're suggesting we protect them? The Altarian ambassador sounded incredulous. I'm suggesting we protect ourselves, Vri corrected. The humans have made it clear their guardians are bound by ancient agreements. But, if Earth falls to a more powerful invader, if humanity is eliminated, those agreements end. And, then, we face the possibility of these entities spreading throughout the galaxy with no one to hold their leashes. The vote was unanimous. Earth would be granted special status, not a member of the hegemony, but a recognized independent world. A 5 light-year exclusion zone would be established. Any species attempting to invade Earth would face hegemony sanctions. Not because the hegemony particularly cared about humanity, but because they were terrified of what would happen if humanity wasn't there to keep their monsters in check. On Earth, as news of the hegemony's decision reached the population, there were celebrations in the streets. Humanity had faced the galaxy's might and emerged victorious. They were free to chart their own course among the stars. But, in the dark corners of the world, in the deep places where shadows gathered and reality wore thin, things stirred and whispered. They had tasted alien flesh. They had learned that the universe was full of prey. And, while they would honor the pact, for now appetite, once awakened, is hard to suppress. General Chen stood on the observation deck of the lunar monitoring station, Earth hanging in the void before her. It looked so peaceful from here. You couldn't see the monsters sleeping in its depths.
You couldn't hear the whispers in the darkness. You couldn't feel the hungry eyes watching from spaces between spaces. So what happens now? Dr. Sterling asked, joining her. Now. We do what humanity has always done. We adapt. We survive. We keep our bargains and hope they keep theirs. She paused, watching Earth turn slowly in the void. And we prepare for the day when they might not. You think that day will come? Chen was quiet for a long moment. The entities aren't evil, Doctor. They're predators. And predators are only as loyal as their last meal. We've fed them well with the Craxians, but appetite always returns. When it does, we need to be ready. She turned from the window. In the meantime, we have a galaxy to explore. Carefully. Very, very carefully. As Earth spun on through the cosmos, its human children began to reach for the stars. They went armed not with weapons of war, but with knowledge passed down through generations. Knowledge of how to walk quietly in dark places. How to make bargains with things that shouldn't exist. How to be the zookeepers of nightmares. The galaxy watched nervously as humanity took its first steps into the larger universe. Not because humans were dangerous, but because of what walked in their shadow. What slept in their oceans. What dreamed in their darkness. Earth was free. Earth was protected. Earth was terrifying. And, somewhere in the void between stars, things that had never known atmosphere or gravity turned their attention toward the small blue world that had spawned such interesting prey. They tested the boundaries of reality, probing for weaknesses in the ancient pacts. Humanity had won their freedom. But, in a universe full of predators, freedom always comes with a price. The question was, how long before the bill came due?